What makes a murderer's mind tick? Killer Psyche is a true crime podcast from Wondery that explores these types of questions about the crimes that killers and criminals commit. Killer Psyche covers high-profile cases that have shocked the world, and host Candice DeLong uses her 5 decades of experience as a clinical psychiatric nurse and FBI criminal profiler to dissect the motivations and behaviors of the most terrifying felons in history. And you'll definitely want to listen to a recent episode of Killer Psyche where Candice looks into the mysterious murder of Ted Amon, a wealthy Wall Street financier. Ted had been going through a divorce with his wife of 13 years, Generosa, and millions in assets and child custody were at stake. Generosa and her new boyfriend, Denny Pelosi, were the prime suspects. But Generosa died of cancer before police could ever prove her involvement. In 2004, Danny was convicted of second-degree murder, but still maintains his innocence. How does hatred drive a person to murder the father of their children? One of the highlights of the show for me personally was just how knowledgeable Candice is regarding all of the peripheral details to a case. It was really fascinating to gain insights into the aspects that, generally speaking, are either overlooked or not considered in much detail when viewing what is available to the general public, that is. Candice has a lot of experience in her field, that much is obvious, and the reflections she provides are really intriguing. So, listen to Killer Psyche on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or you can listen ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. So for some background, I've been a behavioural health nurse for about 12 years now, and my first job was at a freestanding mental health facility in the south. This facility is pretty uniquely constructed, as it was originally a plantation owned by a wealthy Irishman who emigrated here sometime in the 1700s. The original plantation house, it's still there and is now used as the business office, and the hospital itself was constructed to be attached to the house too. If you explore the campus, there's even a small graveyard with the original owner's tombstone, as well as some other family members of his. Additionally, there's a sign that says something along the lines of, "This is dedicated to the slaves that worked and died on this plantation." Anyway, one of the stories that has been passed down among the employees there for decades is that a young girl in the Irishman's family, one of his daughters or grandchildren, passed away on the plantation at a really young age, and that her ghost still lingers around the house and the facility, and that there are certain patient rooms that have an unusual amount of paranormal activity, I guess you could call it. Now, one day I was walking past one of these rooms, and in my peripheral I could have swore that I saw a young girl who looked to be about 9 or 10 years old sitting on the bed. She was wearing a sort of colonial-looking dress, appropriate for the time period in which she was alive, that is, and looked at me directly in the eyes when I turned to look at her. I was incredibly startled, and my mind raced for a few seconds trying to convince myself that she wasn't actually there. I walked a few feet past the room, gathered my courage to go back, and by the time that I did, she had disappeared from sight. She didn't have any ethereal qualities or anything like that, nothing otherworldly or strange. She literally just looked like a real person sitting there in plain view. During my time there, I never really heard of anyone else who saw her, or as clearly as I did anyway, but every once in a while, one of my co-workers or a patient would experience something strange, like doors opening and slamming shut. I remember one patient in particular that ran out of his room white as a sheet and said that while he was lying in his bed, his bathroom door slammed on its own. It was so loud that I even heard it from the nurse's station myself. This patient was there for addiction and had no history of hallucinations or anything. Anyway, I just thought that I would share this because it feels good to get it off my chest. Thanks for listening. So, this is a story that my brother and I had driving to a friend's house in our neighbour village. The friend invited us to chill out in his apartment with a bunch of other buddies, and we had nothing to do anyway, so we decided to drive to him. And it was almost in the middle of the 10-kilometer distance between our two villages. I'm driving with high beam because the road is pretty dark here and not illuminated, when all of a sudden I saw a man standing on the street with a seemingly pretty bad head injury, holding his hand in front of his eyes because my lights were blinding him. While approaching this man, we then saw two other men sitting on the autumn foliage right by the road, seesawing their upper bodies, also with head and torso injuries. I emergency braked the car, and this man standing approached us while my brother started panicking and told me that I should reverse ASAP. It really didn't feel like a normal situation, especially after a possible car accident or anything similar. It was like these guys were just sort of chilling there on purpose. But when I started reversing, he began running at us and yelled, "You should drive slowly, we are here," and stuff like that. I turned the car and drove back home, shocked and confused. My brother called the police to check out what was going on with these three men, but we never did hear anything about it after this. But whatever happened that night, it was a pretty disturbing incident. I'm a single male, 33, who lives alone in Denver. My apartment complex is not what you would call a nice building by any means. I'm on a road close to Colfax Avenue, which, if you're familiar with the geography of this area, is not the safest boulevard in town. I'm a few streets away from it, but close enough that I wouldn't consider this an up-and-standing or up-and-coming neighborhood. Anyway, this evening I was watching Netflix on my couch. My two cats were cuddled up against me as I lay under a comforter. The night before, I had watched a horror movie that was scary enough to leave me in an unsettled mood, making it hard to sleep. So this night, I decided to watch a stand-up special instead, keep it light so I wouldn't have any trouble getting some shut-eye. I have classes early the next morning, so I was surprised when I made the conscious decision to turn on a second stand-up special and let myself fall asleep on the couch. I was just so comfy where I was laying and I didn't want to move, not even to turn off the several lights on throughout my apartment. Now, I remember dozing off around probably 11 o'clock. It was effortless, which meant that I was really snug under the covers with my cats flanking me on either side, creating a tucking in feeling. I fell into a dream wherein I was on an impromptu date with this guy who I didn't recognize at a Blockbuster video store of all things. He bought me blue and yellow underwear, like a Blockbuster would sell in Dreamland, insinuating that I would take the hint of his intentions. He was also desperate for a job, so when we got to the counter, he was given an off-the-cuff interview, and that didn't go well. And all of a sudden, I'm just not sleeping anymore. I'm woken up by a knock at my door. Then a man's voice says, "Maintenance," and I just sort of sat there, sitting bolt upright on my couch. I knew something was off immediately, and I looked at my phone, which was by my left hand, and the time was 2:15 in the morning. I didn't move. The floors of my apartment are really old, and there are many creaky floorboards. I didn't want whoever this was knocking to know that somebody was actually home and awake, let alone alert to his presence. My cats got up, though, and ran over to the door as they normally would, but I stayed still and listened. After a few minutes with no answer, the man walked away from the door and down the hallway to the stairs. A moment after that, I heard the back door to the building swing open and closed. I have one window where I have partial view of that door, so I break my paralysis and race over to it. What I saw was an old-looking green SUV sitting in the no parking zone just in front of the back door. It must have been running the entire time because I didn't hear it start up and the brake lights were glowing red. Someone, presumably the maintenance man, got in the car and just drove off. Now, obviously, I don't know what his intentions really were, but no one knocks on someone's door at like 2:15 in the morning claiming to work for the landlord with good deeds in mind, right? Had it been a true emergency, wouldn't he have knocked again? used his service key to get into the unit? What did I just avoid here? I can only assume that it was an attempted robbery at best, or maybe an abduction at worst. When I was watching the SUV drive off, I surveyed the other apartment windows. They were all dark, and I can see every unit except the two other corner apartments below me from the vantage point. I think because my apartment sort of sticks out from the building and has many windows, maybe I was targeted because my lights were visibly on and noticeable from the street or something. However, I don't know how this individual got into the building in the first place, as you would need a key to do so. I've never been so legitimately afraid as a single person living alone. I'm grateful that I installed a security chain on my door when I moved in too. I'm also really glad that, even in my disorientated state, I had the presence of mind not to move from the couch or make any noise. My nerves are definitely shot. I don't think that I'll be going back to dreamland anytime soon. I've turned off all the lights save for the lamp by my bed. I usually can't sleep with it on, but tonight, I really don't think that I'm going to be getting much sleep anyway. So this is my story, and I guess perhaps it's not so much a story as such, but a few separate encounters that I've had with the paranormal. It's not structured in a linear way, and it doesn't have a twist or a dramatic end, because unlike a lot of other paranormal internet stories, these events that I experienced are actually true. These events took place about 8 years ago in my house in Fitch's Crescent, Malden, Essex, England. I can't give out the exact door number for obvious reasons, but this house was, and as a non-believer in the paranormal it pains me to say it, actually haunted. I knew it too, and all my friends knew it as well. I feel pretty ignorant, I guess, to still be using scientific reasoning behind ghosts not existing after my experiences in this house. Perhaps I just try to comfort myself or something. I don't know, but if ghosts don't exist, then what on earth was going on in this house? Anyway, these events happened over the ages of 17 to 21 years old. Without further ado, here's what happened. Firstly, this was, and I believe still is, a council house. The previous occupants had died there, which added to the whole spooky ambience of the abode. What's weird though is that I'm sure the house was not haunted by him. He had his name spelt into the concrete in the back garden, crudely done by finger, when the concrete was fresh and wet, of course. One thing I want to clear up too, pretty much everyone in our house, we were weed smokers. We understand that consumption of cannabis makes you more anxious to the frequent small knocks and creaks of the house. Sometimes under the right atmosphere it could make you feel like you're being watched. And for all intents and purposes, I'll be leaving out these small encounters purely because of the fact that they could be down to the paranoia. But what I'm going to present to you is the slap bang in the face big unexplainable things that happened. The things that couldn't simply be chalked up to paranoia. So, one day, me and my mother were sitting in the living room, casual afternoon, broad daylight. We were then startled by the sound of choking behind one of the beanbags near the TV. It sounded like one of our cats was being sick, hocking up a furball if you've ever heard it. Me and my mum gave each other the look being some freaky stuff was going on and we both knew it. Although, if the cat was choking, it was probably a good idea to try and save it, right? After all, we did love this little guy. So I got up to move the beanbag and, to my avail, no cat. Also, the choking stopped immediately after I moved the bag too. This was one of the many things that happened in this house that we knew to be immediately haunted. The next one is a strange one. Me and my mum and dad and a couple of my friends were all sitting around the table in the kitchen at evening, smoking as we did. Yeah, I guess you could say that it was a bit of a weird setup, but it was better than smoking in the streets, and my friends all got on incredibly well with my mum. She was quite the magnetic person. Sometimes I wondered if my friends liked her more than me, in fact. But we were all sitting in the kitchen, and my mum pointed out that she could see my reflection of my face in the window. which wouldn't have been so weird if it weren't for me facing away from the window. Everyone else's faces were reflected normally in accordance with the laws of physics, but not mine. I was facing the wall with my back to the window, yet my face was being reflected as if it were facing it. The only difference being the section where my eyes are positioned were completely blacked out, like a shadow stretching across just that part of my face. We searched the whole room, looking for anything that could have explained this sort of reflection, but there was nothing. No mirrors, no shiny cooker, nothing but just matte painted walls. Why it had to be me that this happened to, I don't know, but it was freaky. So this next one is the same story as before, but now daytime. Me and my family and friends were in the kitchen. We spent a lot of time in the kitchen, actually. It was more sociable than the living room, I guess. But as we're all sitting there, a thick brown smoke started coming through the spotlights in the ceiling, and weirdly it was like the color of chocolate. This is inconsistent with tobacco smoke, which gives off a greyish color, but the smoke sort of hung near the ceiling and didn't fall down to us, and remained there for about 2 minutes, I would say, before just disappearing completely. And after that, it never happened again. The next one was the first time that I'd actually seen whatever it was that was haunting my house. And quite honestly, the image has been burned into my mind and pretty much lives there rent-free now. So one night, I headed downstairs to go for a pee. Everyone else in the house was sound asleep as it was about 3 in the morning. We had a medicine cabinet mirror in the front of our toilet that reflected into the hallway leading into the living room. And as I was doing my thing, I looked into the mirror and saw in the living room doorway a white ghostly looking girl just looking back at me. I sharply stopped what I was doing and turned around, to which point she was now gone. I remember seeing her though. She was taller than I was, maybe about 5'9" with long black hair, Victorian clothing, typical I know, and a very non-threatening face. Remember, just because there's a ghost in the house doesn't mean that it wants to cause you harm, I suppose. But this encounter obviously terrified me. I shot upstairs straight back to bed afterwards, telling everyone of what I saw the next day, but still trying to convince myself that I must be seeing things. Now, the next encounter was by far the most threatening. I'm not sure what it was about it too, but this felt just completely hostile. So it was just me and my mum in the kitchen this time, sitting and chatting as we always did. Broad daylight, may I add. As we were chatting away, we heard a scuttling coming from the living room, like a fast series of taps on the floor, like if there were a giant spider tapping around. We look at each other and did the look. "You heard that, right?" I asked my mum, to which she agreed that she did. And then it happened again. It was really unusual too, because we'd never heard anything like this before, a scuttling. Then, all of a sudden, it sounded as if the scuttling started running from the living room into the bathroom next to the kitchen that we were in. We both stood up, my heart pounding, and for the first time it actually invoked a fight for your life feeling in me. I was in full defense mode, ready to protect me and my mum against whatever this thing was. I can't explain what this feeling was though, like an imminent death is coming sort of feeling, so try your hardest to not let that happen. We stood there for a few seconds and nothing came of it. I was stuck where I was standing for about half a minute, I would guess, before cautiously proceeding into the hallways to see what the heck just happened. And again, nothing. There was nothing there. This was definitely the most threatening presence that we'd ever experienced in that house, and man, that one was really scary. The next story was one morning, my mum went to greet one of our neighbours. This neighbour was also a family friend, and we'd regularly visit her house, and she'd frequently come over to ours as well. However, this morning, The neighbour was off with my mum. "Finally decided to talk to me, have ya?" she said. Confused, my mum asked her what she meant. My mum had been asleep most of this morning, so had no idea what she had done to provoke such hostility. And according to my neighbour, she had tried knocking earlier and saw a hand glide over the door handle and then move away. Now, it was only me, my mum, and my dad in this house at the time. I have a sister, but she was at a sleepover at her friend's. My mum, of course, cleared this up with the neighbour, but the idea of where the hand came from left us all very confused. Although it was lucky the neighbour knew of the reputation this house had for the weird going-ons inside. The next event occurred whilst I wasn't home. It was my family and my friends waiting for me to get home who were there at that time. Remember how I said that my mum was that magnetic? Well, when I got home, I was told about this strange thing that happened while I was away, that they happened to get an audio recording of. But they were in the kitchen and could hear walking around upstairs. There were various other noises like coughing and mumblings, and then all of a sudden, a guitar being plucked a couple of times. Spooked, my friend went upstairs to investigate into my sister's room, and when she entered, she saw the guitar, which usually was on its stand, placed on my sister's bed. The final thing that happened was back to the kitchen. I had a particular friend over who was a non-believer in the paranormal too. He was very smugly a non-believer too, and we'd tell him all of the strange experiences that happened, and he would say, "I'm sure you're all very sincere about these experiences," but with a hint of, "Yeah, that couldn't happen" about it. And just as he was giving one of his ghosts aren't real speeches, a roach, a bit of rolled up cardboard to put in a cigarette, fell into his lap. Now, let me just say that no one knew where on earth this could have come from, and it stopped his speech in his tracks. He tried to look and find an explanation of where it could have come from, but no one was prepping anything at the time. Bemused that he could find no explanation, my family smugly laughed at this because it was perfectly timed proof that something strange was going on in this house. Safe to say, he never brought it up again. And that's about all I can recall for now, I think. Like I said, this story has no dramatic twist or scary ending, but everything that I've said is completely true. These events actually happened, and no one was hurt, and there's no tragic outcome, but we've moved from that house for now, and I've never experienced ongoings like that since. I've put off sharing it with the world until now because, well, it's not really a compelling story like you see with creepypastas or anything. But I don't know, I just felt like you guys might appreciate the weird going-ons in my old house in Malden, Essex.